Imagine flying high above Europe in World War II. The sky is dark with smoke, flak bursts all around you, and swarms of enemy fighters dart in and out, trying desperately to bring you down. Most planes would never make it home under such conditions. But there was one bomber that gained such a reputation for toughness that the men who flew it gave it a nickname that said it all. They called it a flying tank. This wasn't just a machine, it was a fortress of steel. A bomber designed to take punishment that would have destroyed lesser aircraft and still bring its crew back alive. That aircraft was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a plane that became a legend in the skies. And by the end of this story, you'll see why veterans swore by it and why it carved its place in history as one of the most iconic bombers of all time. The B-17 didn't earn its nickname by accident. During bombing raids over Germany, the Luftwaffe threw everything they had at these American bombers. Fighter planes like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 would come screaming in from every angle, guns blazing. Anti-aircraft batteries on the ground, nicknamed Flak, filled the skies with deadly shrapnel. Yet time and again, the Flying Fortress returned with gaping holes in its fuselage, missing engines, shattered control surfaces, and sometimes even parts of its tail shot clean off. Stories circulated of crews making it back to England with half their plane destroyed. For the men inside, it was nothing short of miraculous. The B-17 had been designed with durability in mind from the very beginning. Boeing engineers created a plane that emphasized not just offensive capability but defensive survivability. Its wings were rugged and reinforced. Its fuselage could take a beating. And its systems were designed with backups in case of damage. The plane carried up to 13.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns in nearly every direction, which meant enemy fighters faced a deadly wall of fire no matter how they approached. The name Flying Fortress wasn't marketing fluff, it was a literal description. Once the B-17 formations assembled, they became a nearly impregnable shield of overlapping fields of fire. But what really set the bomber apart was the way it could keep flying even after catastrophic damage. Unlike many other aircraft of the era, the B-17 had an extraordinary ability to stay airborne with multiple engines knocked out. Out of its four Wright R-1820 Cyclone radial engines, it could limp home on just two. And in desperate situations, even one engine was sometimes enough to make a crash landing back in friendly territory. Crews told harrowing tales of returning to base with huge sections of wing shot away, tails riddled with holes, and cockpits nearly destroyed. One famous photograph shows a B-17 flying back with its nose blown apart. Yet somehow, against all odds, the crew survived. The psychological effect of this toughness cannot be overstated. For the young airmen tasked with flying long missions into hostile territory, knowing that their bomber had a fighting chance to get them back alive made all the difference. Missions were terrifying. Bombing runs over places like Berlin, Hamburg, or Dresden meant hours of flying into heavily defended skies. Losses were high, especially in the early years before long-range fighter escorts became common. But when men saw B-17s limping home with massive holes in their fuselage, it gave them hope. If the Flying Fortress could take that much punishment and still survive, maybe they could too. Another factor was the formation tactics used by B-17 units. Rather than flying individually, the bombers formed massive combat boxes, where each plane covered the blind spots of the others with overlapping fields of machine gun fire. This turned the sky into a death trap for enemy fighters. Even the most skilled German aces hesitated to dive into the storm of lead that greeted them when they attacked a B-17 formation head-on. It didn't make the mission safe, far from it, but it did make the bombers far more dangerous than almost any other aircraft in the sky. What's remarkable is that despite this toughness, the B-17 was not the largest or heaviest bomber of the war. The B-24 Liberator, for example, could carry more bombs and fly farther. The British Lancaster was capable of hauling the massive Grand Slam bombs that no American bomber could match. Yet the B-17 earned a reputation not for size or payload but for dependability. Crews trusted it because it brought them back alive more often than its rivals. This reliability was why many US commanders preferred the B-17 for high-profile, dangerous missions. There are countless individual stories that showcase the bomber's resilience. In one mission, a B-17 returned to base with its tail nearly severed from the rest of the plane, connected only by a few struts and cables. Another came back with a gaping hole in its side so large that men could walk through it in midair. Perhaps the most famous case was the All American, a B-17 that collided midair with a German fighter, nearly splitting the bomber in half. Incredibly, the plane managed to stay together and return to base, saving the lives of its crew. Tales like these spread quickly among airmen, solidifying the aircraft's legendary status. For the Germans, the BA-17 was both a formidable opponent and a constant thorn in their side. The daylight bombing campaigns forced the Luftwaffe to stretch its resources thin, scrambling to intercept wave after wave of flying fortresses. Despite inflicting heavy losses, they couldn't stop the relentless American air offensive. Every BA-17 that made it back and every bomb that dropped on German factories, railroads, and cities weakened the Nazi war machine. By the later years of the war, with improved escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang flying alongside them, the B-17s finally gained the protection they needed to strike deep into enemy territory with devastating effect. The nickname Flying Tank wasn't just about the bomber's physical resilience, it also spoke to the mindset of the crews. To them, the BA-17 was a trusted companion, a steel beast that shielded them from the worst the enemy could throw at them. Many veterans credited the aircraft itself for their survival. After the war, countless stories were told at reunions where men would look at photographs of their battered planes and shake their heads in disbelief that they'd ever made it back alive. Even today, when you see a surviving BA-17 at an airshow, it's hard not to feel the weight of its history. The riveted metal skin, the rows of gun ports, and the sheer bulk of its design all speak to an era when air combat was a brutal test of endurance and courage. Of the more than 12,000 B-17s built, only a handful still fly, yet they remain living symbols of the toughness and bravery that defined an entire generation. The BA-17 wasn't the fastest, or the biggest, or the most advanced bomber of World War II, but it was the one that crews trusted to bring them home. It was the bomber so tough that it became more than just a machine, it became a legend. And perhaps that's why, decades later, when people look back at the air war over Europe, it's the image of the flying fortress that stands tallest. A bomber that shrugged off bullets, shells, and firestorms, and kept on flying. A true flying tank.